Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about my best books of 2024. And just because the numbers sound nice, there are going to be 24 books. Unlike previous years where I've been able, unlike 2023, which was an anomaly of a year because I could tell you straight off the bat what my top book of the year was. These are in no particular order. I'm in fact just going to share them in the order that I read them throughout the year. So as I said, there are going to be 24 books that I talk about. I'm going to be fairly brief about them because I've talked about them before. I have reviews for them up on my channel, and in some cases I may have read them more than once. What I did tell myself is that I was not allowed to include rereads on this list because, quite frankly, if I included rereads, this list would have been exactly the same as 2023 because I basically reread everything that I read that year. Back in January, I read You Made a Fool of Death with Her Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This was a book that had been on my radar in 2023, I just didn't pick it up, and I finally did, and I absolutely loved it. It is a contemporary romance. It does kind of lean contemporary fiction-ish, but the romance is a very, very, very big part of this story. It is about a young woman whose husband has died. She's just gotten back into the dating scene and she's kind of seeing/sleeping with this guy, and she ends up going on holiday with him to his father's estate, and there she meets his father, and the two of them form this intense connection. They can both relate. They've both lost partners and their connection is incredible. This is a book that will have you sitting on the edge of your seat, waiting to see what happens, how people find out, how people react to their relationship. But it's also just so beautiful and moving and looks at grief and love and how we can find our person. It's a really, really wonderful book. Also in January, I read Last Light by Claire Kent for the first time. This is entirely the fault of Heather from Here Booktubes, and I then went down a rabbit hole of Claire Kent. Now, this was not the first Claire Kent book that I'd ever read. The first book I read was Hold, and I just hadn't been into Claire Kent's backlist. Last Light is a dystopian romance. It's set after the world has ended. There's been a global crisis, and people are essentially living either isolated or in very small communities. And our female protagonist in this one is finally on her own. Her last family member has died, and she sets out to try and make her way to one of these small communities for safety. And she ends up crossing paths with an older guy from her town who was the town mechanic. She didn't really have a relationship with him at all, but in order for her to travel safely, they end up teaming up. And it's their romance. They end up holing up in a cabin that they find and exploring their relationship, which in any other circumstances would not have happened. It is entirely due to the fact that the world has gone to crap and they're forced together, and their relationship is really lovely. This is technically a standalone book on its own. There is a series, the Kindled series, that includes these characters and other characters, but this technically isn't included as book one in that series, so you can kind of just read it on its own. But I highly recommend the whole thing because it's amazing, and then there's going to be a spin-off series in 2025, so I'm really looking forward to that. Then in February, I read Garlic and the Vampire and Garlic and the Witch by Bree Paulsen. I'm counting these as one book just because it's a series. These books are utterly delightful. They are about a little garlic plant, a sentient garlic plant, who is afraid of many things. But in Garlic and the Vampire, she is tasked with checking out their newest neighbor who happens to be a vampire, and the rest of her family are very terrified of this vampire, but because she's garlic and, you know, vampires are supposed to not like garlic, she's sent along. And so she has to be brave and fearless. And the whole thing is just utterly gorgeous. These are graphic novels, they're middle fiction, they're beautifully illustrated, they've got a gorgeous story. I like them both. I think they both have really great messages, and it's really worth checking out if you are a fan of middle fiction graphic novels. Also in February, I read How Decent Folk Behave by Maxine Beneba Clark. This is a poetry collection by Maxine Beneba Clark, and it is a collection of her work reflecting on major events that have happened throughout the 21st century. It includes reflections on the treatment of Black people in America by the police. It looks at the death of women in Australia at the hands of men. It reflects on COVID coming and going. It looks at natural disasters, and it's just so beautifully done. I've read a couple of Maxine Beneba Clark's books this year, and I absolutely adore her work. So highly recommend this one. She also has a kids collection, which I'm going to include in a video over on Kidlit Joy, but I just figured I'd include the adult one here. Really, I could have picked either of them. In April, I read Paladin's Faith by T. Kingfisher. This is the fourth book in the Saint of Steel series. It is one of the few fantasy romance series that I religiously read now whenever a book comes out. Again, this is totally Heather's fault, but these are such an enjoyable time. They're set in an extended world of T. Kingfishers. I have to read the earlier books, but I've really enjoyed the Saint of Steel books. Our male protagonist is a paladin of a dead god, and he is grumpy, surly, and kind of doesn't like dealing with people. His name is Shane, and he is tasked with helping Marguerite, who is a character we met very early on in the series, with traveling to collect information. And she is very much a spy. She's very good at what she does. And she just delights in making Shane uncomfortable. Uncomfortable in trying to draw him out of his shell and just poking and prodding at him until she gets a reaction. And it's their relationship. And there are some really fantastic side characters. There is a demon side plot as well, which was awesome. And it sets up the next book really, really well, and I'm so excited about it. I'm thoroughly enjoying the series. So much so that I'm collecting the very expensive hardcovers, because these are gorgeous. Although I think they're changing the covers, which I don't know, maybe we won't be able to get that for book 5. I'll be really sad if I can't. Then moving into June, we have Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. It's been a while since I read an Emily St. John Mandel book, and I just love her work. Her work is always very speculative, leans into the science fiction kind of side of things, but mostly kind of dystopian-ish. But this one is very much a bit of a time slip novel, as characters kind of weave into and out of timelines in order to save the world, and I loved it. I think I misspoke earlier when I said I didn't include any rereads. I did include one reread, and the only reason I included this is because it's been about 20 years since I read the book, so it's not a recent reread. And that is Alanna the First Adventure, and really I could include the entire Song of the Lioness quartet as one in this, because I decided to pick up the Tamora Pierce series that I had the clearest recollection of reading many years ago, and it was this one. And this is the story of a young girl who is about to be sent off to a monastery to study to become the priest or magician or whatever it is. I'm so professional at this. And she decides that she doesn't want to do that, and she and her brother swap places, and she goes in his place to become a knight, and she disguises herself as a boy and goes through all of the training. And it is just a really incredible story that has held up over time. There aren't too many problematic things within this book, and Alanna is just such a strong female protagonist for a young adult fantasy series. Technically, I suppose these days we would classify this in the younger YA upper middle grade category, but these were what young adult books were back while I was growing up, not what we have now, which basically borders on new adult romance kind of stories for older teens. This really suits a sort of younger young adult category, and it's glorious because of that. Like that, there's a beauty in that. And to top it all off, it's a fantasy story. There is a romance. Alanna in the series has multiple crushes and technically multiple partners, and that was part of the controversy of the book. But that's who she is, and that's her exploring her relationships and trying to find what works for her in this world. And she makes mistakes and she learns from them. And I think that is just an incredible part of this entire story. So loved rereading that this year. Also in June, where is it? Stars by Tal Bauer. This is the second book in a series that is a spin-off of another series. So there is the Executive Office series, and then there is this one. And Stars, and the book that comes before it, follows the Russian president and his partner. It is an queer romance. These are romantic suspense. And Sasha, who is the love interest, has been training as an astronaut in America. There is a lot of unrest in Russia, but Sasha is finally getting his chance to actually go into space. And things go to hell in a handbasket. There is a horror element in this that I was not expecting, but I appreciated. Like, that's just something that I've always been into. So that takes this book from being just pure romantic suspense into horror sci-fi kind of elements, and I love that. I love these characters. I think they've been through so much. There's a lot of emotion and drama. It's a Tal Bauer book, so of course there is. It's really about these two characters fighting for their relationship, which is, not accepted in their home country. Also in June, I read The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst, and this is my new edition of it. I did have an arc of it, and then I have passed that on to a friend. I had to get myself a sprayed edge version because I absolutely love this. This is a cozy fantasy with a romantic subplot, and I just loved it. There are talking plants, there is magic. It's about a young woman who is working in a library. The library is attacked, and she's trying to save as many books as she can, and she escapes to a small island that was the place where she was born, but she hasn't been back there in a really long time. This island has suffered under the rule of the current regime that basically hog magic, but magic has a backlash effect in that it affects surrounding islands, and the government used to send magicians to kind of help combat that, but they haven't for a while. So these islands have been left on their own, And when our character gets there, she discovers that she may be able to access some little magics that might be able to help the island, but she has to do it very secretly because magic is very tightly controlled. The romantic subplot is between her and one of the local men who looks after mer horses, and it was just very sweet and like this is my kind of cozy fantasy. I know people like Legends and Lattes, and I liked that too. It was fine, but this hit all the buttons for me because it was just so lovely. And also, again, beautiful cover. All right, August was also a really good reading month. I do have another 4 books from August. The first one is Full Speed to a Crash Landing by Beth Revis. I actually listened to this as an audiobook originally, so I do need to do a reread in this physical book. It's tiny, like it's so small. Like, hang on, where's a regular size book? Look. It's tiny. This is a space heist romance novella. It is about Ada, who is at the wreck site of a spaceship trying to recover things. That's her job. And she's running out of air. And then along comes a sanctioned ship, and she is rescued by them and starts to help them with their own recovery efforts. But little do the crew of that ship know that Ada is there for a very specific reason, that Ada knows more than they think she does. And I love this concept. So Heather calls it Mask Off, where there's a character who knows way more than they're letting on, more than anyone thinks that they know. And that's exactly what this is. It's really fun. There's a lot of humor. The tension between the two romantic interests in this is great. The majority of the book is told from Ada's perspective, and then at the very end, we kind of get our male protagonist's perspective through a series of emails and communications between him and his bosses. And I just thought that was really cool and an interesting way to do it. Now, I have read Beth Revis before. I think I've read some of her work with the Star Wars universe, but this series is great. I read the second book as well this year, loved it, cannot wait for the third book. I don't have books for the next 3. There is Of the Wild by E. Wambheim, which is a paranormal romance fantasy kind of novella. It is queer, it is MM. Our main character is kind of this god or immortal being that lives in a forest, and legends say that he steals children, and he does. He has a collection of children, but what we discover is that he takes children who come from homes where they are being mistreated and abused, and these children are not thriving. In fact, they're more likely going to suffer damage or death in the place where they are. And he raises them as their own in this magic place. His magic is dying, and then one day a human man stumbles into his world through the veil that he has set up that kind of prevents humans from interacting with him and his children. And it is the connection that they form, the relationship that they form, but also this passing of guardianship as well. It is utterly beautiful. I loved it. It was just so quiet and gorgeous and lovely, and I had a great time reading it. Then there is Live, Laugh, Lurk by Elsie Winters, which is a paranormal monster romance kind of cozy novella. It is about a woman who takes a job at a university and discovers that she is living downstairs from a Mothman. And their relationship is just absolutely precious, the way that they connect, the way that their relationship builds. I had the best time reading this. It was just a really lovely story. And continuing on my paranormal romance little novella spin, there is Follow Me to the Yew Tree by Desiree M. Nicoli. And this one is about a woman who works for death who stumbles across her fated mate, but he is fated to die, and he is a returning soldier. He has ulcerative colitis, and they end up traveling together, and she's trying not to do her job. It is heartfelt and charming, and the two have to come to accept and understand each other in a way that perhaps our female protagonist has never really had to consider how other people feel, and it was just wonderful. I remember that this was one that I had heard Robin from Paperbacks and Planners talk about a lot, and a lot of my friends had read it, so I was glad that I finally picked it up. And then in September I read Darn It All by Evie Mitchell. This is the long-awaited 3rd book in her All Access series, and our female protagonist is a very quiet, very unassuming character who just loves to create clothing designs, and she gets accepted into a reality TV show for just that, except that she forgot to read the fine print and it is for couples to enter. And so her best friend comes along with her. They fake a relationship together to be on this show and for her to compete. Our male protagonist has a prosthesis, and the story looks at how he copes with that day to day, and how there are good days and there are bad days with that, and how their friendship moves from being a friendship into a relationship. And it was just wonderful. I have been waiting for this book for such a long time. I'm so glad it came out this year, and it was as enjoyable as everything else in the All Access series. All right, in October we have 3 books, and in fact one of them is not a book, it is a fanfic, because Quite frankly, this is the book that came the closest to replacing the rest of the story by Tal Bauer in my affections, and I read it like 4 times within a short period of time. And it is What Are Your Intentions by Screenlet, which is a 911 fanfic. It is an Evan and Tommy fanfic, and basically as soon as this fanfiction was completed, the TV show imploded this relationship, because of course they was. I think I said when I talked about it that I was waiting for them to just absolutely destroy the relationship, and they did, and I'm not entirely convinced I want to watch season 8 when I get access to it, because I'm still mad. But What Are Your Intentions looks at the progression of Evan and Tommy's relationship from the moment that they meet until the moment that they get married and they start a family. It is so well written. These characters, they sound like the characters in the TV show. They leap off the page, and the author of this fanfic has done a really great job of fleshing out the side characters, not only the ones that are from the TV show, because they all sound exactly the same as their characters, but not in a repetitive, I've copied from the show, in a very natural way. But also there's a huge plethora of additional side characters that they've created that blend seamlessly into this world. I would watch this as a TV show, not as the current TV show exists, but I would watch it as its own thing. I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite things that I've read this year. Hands down, highly recommend. It's on AO3. I'm going to include another series as one, and that's the Firebird Chronicles by T.A. White, although technically I've only read the first 3 books in the series. This is a sci-fi romance that again was recommended to me by Heather, because Heather and I just recommend each other books all the time. It is entirely set in space. We have a woman who doesn't really know her parentage, and in the very first book she finds out that she is the long lost child of a very powerful group of people within the universe, and they bargain with her government to take her back home, and she is very put out by this, and she is an incredibly smart, very competent character, and she's constantly butting heads with her handler, who happens to then become her love interest later on. There's a whole lot of world building that goes on within this story, and I don't want to talk about it too much because we are planning on doing a read along this year. I want to continue reading the series, but I also want to reread it with my friends and talk about it in more depth. I think it's one of those series where there's so much that I picked up on first reread, but I think I'm going to pick up so much more on a second read through, which is why I love a read along for books that I've already read. And then also in October, I read Primal Mirror by Nalini Singh. This is the most recent installment in the Psy Changeling series. Absolutely delightful. This one focuses on a different pack. This follows Remy, who is a fairly new pack leader. He's a leopard changeling, and his pack backs on to the property belonging to the Scott family, and the Scotts are Psy. But the woman who is living there is not who he expects. Her name is Auden. She's the daughter of 2 very powerful members of the Psy Council, and she's pregnant. And she is not always cognizant of the things that are going on around her, and Remy feels very protective of her. It is their relationship. It wraps up, or starts to wrap up, some of the Scott storyline as well with the Psy. Really enjoyed this, and I find now, particularly with the Psy Changelings, if I'm not with my favorite characters, I like being with new packs because we get so many new characters and new perspectives. I had a great time with this. I'm looking forward to the next book. In November, I have 2 books from the same series. These are from the Walsh family series by Kate Canterbary. The first one I'm going to talk about is The Cornerstone, which is Shannon and Will's story. This will not be for everyone because Will is a very alpha male character. I happen to enjoy this, but I think it's because I've read other stories where they've been side characters, so I kind of knew what I was getting into when I was reading it. Shannon is one of the oldest of the Welsh siblings, and she basically runs their family business. She's a lawyer, she's very competent, she's very used to running her siblings' lives and keeping them on track, and she finds it really hard to let go. And when Will meets her, they basically butt heads because they're both very alpha, and so they're constantly trying to find their equilibrium as partners, and with Will, Shannon is able to actually relax and let go a little bit, but often not without a fight. Like she's determined to make sure that he knows that she still is very much in control of things. I really like this story just because we've learned so much about Shannon, and it was good to see her finally realize that she doesn't have to be everything for her siblings all the time, and to let some of that go because it also allowed the other characters to grow. Even though she wasn't trying to stifle them, but given their family history, it was something that she'd kind of always just done. And then there's The Spire by Kate Canterbury, which follows the second sister in the family. She's one of the youngest, kind of the wild child, the one that has kind of bucked family tradition. She hasn't gone into architecture or law or the family business. She's a volcanologist by trade, and it's her relationship with a doctor that she meets at one of her siblings' weddings, and they get married the night that they meet, and then they have a long distance relationship over a long period of time. There's also a lot of tension between the two sisters in the family, and so this story is sort of where they reconcile that, and they come together and they find out a little bit about each other and begin to repair that relationship, which is kind of why I liked it. Finally, for December, my last 5 books, my last 5 books to make my 24. There is Sunastara and the Venusian by Jess K. Hardy. I've really come to enjoy Jess K. Hardy's writing this year. I've read 2 of her books this year and 1 previous to that. This is a sci-fi romance. It is about a woman who is grieving the loss of her son, and she works as the hospitality director aboard a space cruise. At the start of the book, she has a one-night stand on a planet while she's on leave, and then a couple of months later, she finds out that the one-night stand is now the language expert aboard her ship. The two are trying to work out whether or not they can have a relationship. She doesn't believe that she's ready to connect with anyone in any significant way, given her grief, and the two actually connect over grief when they finally sit down and have a proper conversation about what it is that is stopping and blocking their relationship. Alongside that, there is a political plot, there is space cruise, pleasure cruise shenanigans. The whole thing is utterly delightful and fun. I laughed, I cried, it was just a great time all around. And while I've included other series as one, I'm including the next 2 books as individual books just because I think they do slightly different things. There is The Murder Between Us by Tal Bauer, which is an romantic suspense story. It is between an FBI profiler and an FBI agent who are investigating a series of murders. Our FBI agent is queer and questioning his sexual identity at the start of this book, and he has a one-night stand while he's in Vegas, and that is with the FBI profiler, though they don't know that they both work for the FBI at the time. And then the FBI profiler is called in to assist on a case that our agent is working on, and this becomes a really big source of conflict. So this book, the reason I wanted to include these as separately is because in this book there is this real tension around settling into your identity as an adult, feeling comfortable, and also beginning a relationship. Our FBI agent is also a single dad. The daughter in this is amazing. And then The Grave Between Us, which follows the same characters, Noah and Cole, is when they're settled in their relationship. So there's a very different feel to these stories. And this one dives really deeply into Cole, our FBI profiler's history and how he got started in profiling, and a case that truly nearly broke him. And it comes back to haunt him in this story. So really intense stories. Very much, if you like Criminal Minds, these books will be for you. And then the last 2 books are books that I literally read between Christmas and New Year. There is The Wingman by Stephanie Archer, which is a contemporary hockey romance. This one is the 3rd book in the Vancouver Storm series. I love these illustrated covers for this series. Like, they've actually done a really good job with the detail in them. The reason that this made the list, this is probably a 4.5 star kind of read. It's not a 5 or a 6 star read, but the reason I wanted to include it is because it just brought me joy. If you've watched my wrap up this week, you'll have heard me talk about it. The male character is an absolute cinnamon roll. He has been in love with his best friend for the longest time, but she has been engaged to another friend of his. And so he's never made a move, but he's always tried to be there for her. And when she breaks off that engagement and moves across the country to live with him, he is determined to make sure that she feels comfortable and safe and that she lands on her feet. He loves her, but he doesn't have any intention of starting anything with her. And it's not until she's ready to actually explore her attraction to him that anything happens. Honestly, it was just a really fun, enjoyable time. And then the final book that I read and loved this year was Married to the Devil by Lillian Lark. This is a paranormal monster romance. It is a poly relationship between a witch, a demon, and a gargoyle. This one is messy and complicated. It's not perfect by any means, but it was just such a delightful time. Our main character, Stella, has entered into an arranged marriage with Remy, who is a gargoyle. He's a territory leader. This whole thing is just, honestly, a convenience. She has connections to the community that he has just recently taken over control of, and so having her as his wife is a sign of stability. However, she has an attraction to her best friend Ben, who is a demon. He's able to teleport, and he also currently works as the second in command for another territory leader. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest here. But Remy recognizes not only does she have these feelings for him, but Remy himself recognizes something in Ben that pulls him towards him as well, and he starts to maneuver them. He's very good at trying to manipulate situations to try and get people to do what he wants, and that's what he's trying to do, but he's constantly thwarted by the other two, who just do things that he doesn't expect them to, and they do things in an incredibly competent way, and he's just always kind of left trying to catch up with them, and I loved that. So if you watch my recent wrap up, I've talked about this book. It's got all the content warnings and things like that in it, but It was just a really great time, and anytime Lillian Lark puts out a book, I'm going to read it, and it's always going to end up on a favourites list because I thoroughly enjoy her writing. Now, after that incredibly long time, that is my 24 top books for 2024. There's a large variety of books in there, I appreciate that, but honestly, they were such a great time and I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. In the comments, I would love to know, have you read any of these books? Are you planning on picking any of them up? Or feel free to share some of your favourites from 2024. If you just want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a book stack emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.